So may I call you Randy? Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, it sounds fine.
All
Randy's
right.
good.
All right. Well, greetings and welcome back, everybody, to Words, Images, and Worlds. Glad to be talking with comics creator Randy Emberlin on this episode. Randy, thanks for jumping in. Thank you for the artwork that's currently existing behind you underneath
Well, I
Godzilla's
actually
gaze.
I did bring it along. I mean, it's like we can talk about it later, but that's
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
that's the famous, 30th anniversary print from 365 of Amazing Spider-Man. And I have a
Yes.
picture with Stan Lee, where we're holding it 30
Hmm.
odd years ago, and then a picture like 2 years before he passed away. So it's kind of this connecting piece, for me. It's
Yeah.
that was a big part of Carnage, Spider-Man, and Venom. They were big
Mhm.
deals. So, and I've got a couple other pieces we can talk about later, but
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that issue well and remember that entire arc and just what a big deal Venom and Carnage were in the world of Spider-Man. It was kind of this cool new turn in that world as a reader.
yeah, it changed things. Definitely did. I mean,
Yeah.
not just sales, but it was a different, like you said, it was before that, it was kind of villain, villain, villain. And there were villains we'd seen before and they kept reappearing. And sometimes there were a couple of, arcs were like short, which I like. I liked being able
Mhm.
to do lots of different stories with different villains. And I like David Michelinie. I think he's a great Spider-Man
Mhm.
writer. But that whole Carnage, Venom thing, it became its own entity. It's like evolved into this thing.
Yeah,
So
as Carnage would. Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So Amazing is I think the title you spent the most time on for Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's about
Um,
5 years or so. Yeah,
yeah. You did some with Astonishing as
actually, no,
well.
it was Web of Spider-Man.
Oh,
So
Web. Okay.
yeah, actually I had a year with Eric Larson, so that was
Hmm.
like 339 or thereabouts, the end of 88 or in 89, and then we did up through 350, and that was like a double size issue with Doctor Doom. It's one of my favorite ones. I think it's really fun.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Bagley came, and so Bagley was probably about you know, it was a 65 issue run, so that's over 5 years. And
Hmm.
then they moved me over to Web with Stephen Butler. And in fact, here's a Stephen Butler piece just because that was during the Clone Saga,
Oh,
you know,
yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
Scarlet Spider. So the Scarlet Spider was something I actually got to be involved in, and I guess one of those issues, it's the first appearance of his costume was one I worked on there, as well as Carnage. So it was pretty cool. Here's also the rejected cover to the first appearance of Carnage 361. So we
Interesting.
know
Yeah.
everybody's seen the one where they're wrapped in tentacles and Carnage is below Spider-Man, but this one we did first, and then I kept it and put Carnage on it, and I thought it would be a nice memento. Well, it turned out it was stolen from the offices at Marvel and was circulating for like 25 years or more,
Ah.
probably closer to 30. I think it auctioned 2 years ago in the summer at Heritage for like $66,000. The black
Wow.
and white, yeah. So I had this and made a print out of it because I thought, well, I should, since I don't have it, and I at least had a copy of it and people
Uh-huh.
could see it. And then Marvel came looking for it. They came looking for a print. I don't know, 2019, because they wanted to turn it into a Marvel hidden gem and print it as like 1 in 100 that appears in boxes of whatever they were doing with it. And they were going to pay me for it. And I said, no, just send swag and comic books for our camps because we did those comic book art camps for 13 years. And
Yeah.
Marvel was one of the last companies to get on board. And DC and Archie and Dark Horse were already, on board for years. And it's so weird. My company was the last one. It's like, but at least it happened. We got it to happen, and it was good.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned before we hit record, you come from a family of educators, it sounds
Yeah.
like. And so you have worked with students in the space of comics camps. How did that work come to be?
Well, it started even before the camps with I wanted to do some teaching because I knew that comics were really soft. They really, after the fall of Marvel and their Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the 90s, I
Mhm.
went to Dark Horse because I helped actually Mike Richardson with Chris Warner and Ron Randall. We helped launch Dark Horse we did our own characters and did those first 4 episodes or issues of Dark Horse Presents. So I did Mind Walk, and that was,
Yeah.
saving grace was, hey, I have a company I can go to because Marvel's tanking. So, I went and I did Ghost over there with Yvonne Reis, or it looks like Ivan Rice, but the guy who
Mhm.
did the Green Lantern stuff, he's doing all this Batman stuff for DC. He is amazing, Brazilian artist, probably the greatest artist I've ever worked with. And I got to do 3 years on a female book, Ghost, with him. So that was after Marvel. I went there, and then I realized, I still needed something else. So I started um, teaching through young audiences, which is here in Southwest Washington and Oregon. And
Mhm.
you have to go in and sort of audition and come up with a spiel. And so I had basically it was an assembly program where I drew for kids and talked about storytelling and sequential art and what the process of how a comic book is made. And I had lots of original art samples, which I probably should never have done. You think about it, they're safe, but they're worth a fortune. Like some of those pages are $10,000 pages now. And it's like, but I just had them out there, had them in bags, whatever. But I did some of that. And then I did schools. I actually taught at an art store that was just a few blocks away, and they let me teach classes. So I got my curriculum together, and then I was able to go into the schools and do enrichment programs like after school art. So I did animation and comic book, character construction. So we would do,
Mhm.
a character each session, and then we would actually do some zoetrope animation because I was an animator for 10 years before I even got into comics, and we
Okay.
did 50
Yeah.
commercials. So I'd had a lot of experience doing that kind of stuff. But teaching, yeah, my dad was a principal, my wife was an elementary school teacher, and my uncle was a high school teacher, and a lot of teachers. And so it wasn't difficult for me to kind of make that. And I had private students too. I did teach a lot of private students. So that, and then ultimately, like we're talking about, the comic book art camp was the result of my wife going, well, why don't you, camps are great. So why don't we do 3 weeks? First of all, let's just do a week and see if it works.
Mhm.
And you do the camp that you would have wanted when you were a kid,
Mhm.
because there was nothing. I took some classes at the art museum here in Portland, and they were, kind of dull. I mean, it's like, oh, let's try some, colored, pencils, or we're going to try some chalk, or we're going to do some charcoal or whatever. And it was very much still kind of traditional art, not creative comic book commercial art, which is what I really wanted. But that's all you get. So anyway, so I did. I put together a camp with her help, and I had my students. A lot of them were high school or college that had been really great students, and so we employed them as assistant teachers. And so I had at least 3 or 4 usually, like my eyes and hands out there, and amongst a class of maybe 32 kids, 35 kids, and we do mornings and afternoons. And anyway, it was really successful, and it was really fun.
Mhm.
We stopped doing it when COVID hit because it wasn't possible. And then after a couple of years of that, we realized we're not going back to that. All of our assistant teachers have gotten married or have jobs now, and we're getting older, so we all retired and stopped teaching. But that was 13 years of really, really some fantastic. I mean, they did comic book covers, and they learned characters twice a day, and they did sequential, at least a one-page comic strip by the end, and a like sound effect poster, and a lot of information. And we watched a lot of really good animation too at the breaks, and there was tons of swag. I mean, tons. It's like every, posters and buttons and bookmarkers and some toys in some cases, and we had grand prizes that were donated by some of the companies at the end, and everybody had a chance to put their name in the bucket and all that kind of stuff. So it was really a lot of fun. It was probably one of the better things I got to be involved in.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. I love the possibilities of comics and drawing and creating for just teaching literacy in the language arts. So, very much speaking my language here. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it helped me to learn to read, and I think we talked about that before. But I was reading pretty well at age 4. I was reading comic books, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of big words and language. I mean, I'm sure I struggled, but I bothered my grandmother and my mother all the time, and they're the ones who bought the comics. And so by the time I hit first grade, man, I was reading at about fifth grade level or sixth grade level, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
met Chris Warner, who's like the guy that got me into Marvel. Really, I mean, he had been here and working with me at a book company, educational book company, and he never gave up. He had his portfolio and his sketchbooks and kept trying at San Diego, and finally he had some of the professionals there, editor and some artists, look at his work and said, "You're good enough if you save your money and come stay in New York for 3 months and come into the office, you'll have regular work." And he did. He moved, lived with a friend in New Jersey, and once he was in, I was doing animation for TV commercials, and it was just struggling. It's just
Mhm.
so hard unless you're in LA or something. So I sent work through him so that his editor, Carl Potts, became my editor ultimately. But
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was one of
yeah.
those emergencies where it's like they go, "Here's okay, Randy, it looks good. Can you do this 7 pages in a week? And we have to get it. We can't miss the printing deadline." And I said,
Mhm.
"Sure." And then when the box came, there was 11 pages in it instead of seven. And it was like, it's like, but I stayed up, night after night, and I think all night the last night, and I got it done, and I got my letter, which I framed, first job in comics, right? He goes, "You've got the regular gig on Alien Legion,"
Yes,
so I
yeah.
got the Alien Legion, and Chris was penciling, so it was great because we had good communication, and I learned a lot from him because he'd studied with Terry Austin for inking and stuff, and and Carl Potts is a great editor because he's an artist. He
Hmm.
started
Hmm.
worked for Neil Adams and stuff at that studio that a lot of those guys worked at. What was it? What's the name of that? Continuity. I think that's the name of
Hmm.
continuity. A lot of people, Joe Rubinstein, all these other people that worked there, and here he's an editor and he's an artist, so he discovered some pretty great people. I mean, Jim Lee's one of them,
Yeah.
and Mike Mignola is another one, and I mean, just kind of go down the list, and
Hmm.
even lesser people like myself, but I had a great career, and it's because of Carl. So, I mean, he got me in, and I was pretty loyal to him for several years. And then when I got the Spider-Man job, it was like, "Sorry, Carl, I got to go. This is amazing Spider-Man,
Yes, yeah. There's certain things that you have to do creatively when you have the
Yeah.
opportunity.
But
Yeah.
he was cool about it. And I see him at, Comic Cons, and it's always fun to talk with Carl and the other guys. There's a bunch of other editors and writers. It's fun to see.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um, I always like to ask about those positive collaborations, positive experiences, and folks that you continue to be in touch with and things of that nature.
yeah. And there's a number, and there's people that I met after comics. I mean, literally here years later, I never had met Alex Saviek, the
Mhm,
guy that
mhm.
did I guess it was Webb before we kicked him off, and I took over Webb with Stephen Butler, right? And I finally met him at one of the shows, and he's just a super nice guy and a musician as well. I'm a musician too,
Oh, I didn't know
so
that.
we so
Mhm.
we both hit it off, and we have a lot of interesting, similar interests. And anyway, it's fun to meet people that you realize were working at the same time you were working, but you didn't know them, because I lived in
Yeah,
Oregon and he lived in Florida or New York or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You mentioned Dark Horse, and I had in my notes to make sure to mention Alien Legion, and also was going to mention Ghost. Dark Horse was just such a cool uh, just approach to comics because for readers like me that got in with Marvel and DC about the same time, Dark Horse kind of happened upon the scene when I started reading. And so
Okay.
yeah, to get such an interesting sort of still comics, but a different take on comics is a really kind of a cool thing to branch out into as a reader. So I imagine that was really rewarding for you creatively as well.
It was. I wish I had done more with them because I had every opportunity. I mean, Mike Richardson is a friend, and he's somebody that I met at the very beginning. I mean, he had, was it four comic book stores, which were called Pegasus Books, and they
Mm-hmm.
eventually became Things from Another World. But he had a restaurant too in Oregon City, and so it was like he had the restaurant and the books, and he came to us. And I had just gotten a job at Marvel. Chris and I were working on both Alien Legion and Doctor Strange. We
Hmm.
picked that
Hmm.
one up, and that was really cool. That because from childhood, that was just a great book. We love Steve Ditko, and so how is it that I got to work on Doctor Strange and Spider Man, and I love Steve Ditko stuff, and so did Carl. Carl
Yeah.
Potts is a big Ditko guy. So, but but yeah, knowing Mike Richardson, and then he comes to us and he goes, "Well, I'm going to start a comic book company, and you guys want to do your own characters for the first few issues, and you'll have this number of pages, and we'll split it up." And of course, it was Concrete, which Paul Chadwick won all kinds of awards for.
Oh
That was
yeah.
one of them. And then Trekker, which Ron Randall is doing now, and he's
Mhm.
doing very successfully as Kickstarters. I don't know how many he's done, but he's done a bunch of them. And his collections, now he has collections of Trekker, and it supports him. I mean, he's doing Trekker. It's great. And let's see who else. It was me doing Mind Walk, which like I said, I had opportunities, never did that much with it. I did a few recurring, when they asked me to, I'd do some episodes or something. But I just never. I wanted to launch another book, and I never called Blazer, and I never got. I canceled the first couple issues and wrote, like an arc, but never. It was comics were in trouble, by then, so it was kind of to do. But yeah, helping with Dark Horse was really cool. We had no idea that it was gonna. I mean, he was very generous with us, kind of sharing some royalties or incentives with us at the beginning. But if you could have, it was private, it was a private company. So if you could have been a stockholder or something, you could have made out on the deal because they were pretty smart. Mike made it through a lot of tough times. And now I guess he sold the company, not all of it, but, he owns a certain share. But it's that time. Probably everybody, it's time to retire eventually. Although he never will, probably he'll want to just keep making movies or something. But
Yeah, yeah.
Dark Horse was good for creators, all different kinds of creators, and I just should have taken advantage of it more. But I was busy, doing a lot of Marvel stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah. When you mentioned you had a good bit of work in animation as well, so I'm curious about kind of the connections that existed for you as far as the work between the way you went about thinking through animation and thinking through comics.
yeah, I was actually a good storyboard artist for comic or for the commercials when we did animation. I was one of the better. I had a partnership of three guys. One who just passed away recently, which is sad. He's one of my best friends, and a musician as well, Don Wallace. And he was my colorist actually on a number of these prints that, from history here and some new ones. But yeah, we had a partnership called Top Light Studios, and it lasted about, 5 years or so.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and over that time, I think that's when we did the bulk of it was TV commercials. So it was like 30 seconds. Back in those days, 30 seconds more than 15 seconds you were doing them, and that takes 600 frames. It was like 720 frames or something like that. So it might be 300 drawings between the three of us, and then we each had an assistant. So, and we got to work with Stan Green, who was one of the heavyweight directors from Disney who retired and then moved to Portland because his wife owned, like a bank or something up here or whatever. But he was great. Stan was super nice, and he was somebody it was a good learning experience to have a director, and he did a lot of the key animation for some of the commercials, so we learned about that as well. Even though we were already doing our own stuff and understood it, but it was just a new level of understanding when you got to work with him. So that was cool. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so animation was fun. I just realized it was a lot of work. I mean, the storyboarding was fun, and that's comic books, right? But
mhm.
when you're doing a scene, you split up a commercial, and everybody takes a scene, and you decide who's best for which scene. Some people animate dialogue better than others. I did action pretty well, so it was fun to do. But boy, it's just very labor intensive. I mean, you're sitting there doing hundreds of drawings.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
That's hard to imagine.
it
Just as
is.
somebody that tries to dabble in art every now and then, that's dedication for sure, and the practice of it.
Yeah, and if you could just get paid really well for it, that would have been really great. But it was never, we were always just struggling, to survive. And we learned a lot. And I think that was neat. And I actually got to meet during that is actually more like about a 7 year period. We got to meet at least four of the original nine animators at Disney, the
Oh
nine
wow.
old men. Yeah, through different, like one did a speech or a lecture series at Portland State that came up, Mark Davis, and then Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas. They signed the book, the Illusion of Life. We all had those books, and it was because the guy had one of the studios. His wife was related to Frank Thomas, I guess, in some way. Anyway, we even were able to buy through him one of those process cameras that did cells.
Oh
So
wow, wow.
they're old. I mean, it's like it's done with, static electricity and toner on acetate, and then the cells have to be individually done and put in vapor bonding chambers with
Mhm.
ammonia. It doesn't sound too great, but it's like we had that in the early days, and then eventually you just sent them off to have them done, down at Cartoon Color or wherever it was that we sent them for Xeroxing. But it was
Yeah.
all learn. It was a great learning process. Didn't make that much money, but it was like I was glad to get into comics because there were a whole lot more benefits in comics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Plus, you got
A
your name out
scientific
there.
process. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's, the difference between animation and comics. The big deal is that Marvel especially made a big deal out of the artists, even the inkers.
Hmm.
Like, I was an
Hmm.
inker most of the time, and so it was your name was on the comic book. So if the comic book was popular, you got attention. If you're doing animation, nobody knows who did that commercial. They'd have to go call and find out or look it up or something. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's
Hmm.
a big difference. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I get invited to Comic Cons is because people know my work. So it's good.
Yeah, yeah. Right there on the front of the issue, or at least in the masthead, there are the
Yeah.
names. And
Oh,
everybody goes through that time where they realize, oh, that person is doing this. So,
yeah, it was a positive, and I realized that comics were one of those, at least at the time in the 80s, comics were going like this, they were just
hmm.
zooming up and there was just tons of work and people were coming into the industry and it was as hard as you could work, as much money as you could make kind of thing. And so it was great to have a job where, you were rewarded for working hard and making your deadlines and that kind of thing. And so many, times you're working with ad agencies and with commercials and just not appreciated. I mean, they just
Hmm.
treat you like, so it was good. And Marvel was really good about paying on time. They just never missed. And I was able to do most of all of my work here in Portland, Oregon, because of FedEx, which came in, I don't know, around 82 or something like that. And
Hmm.
so being able to FedEx overnight, pages would go back and forth between, the letterer and the penciler and the writer and then the inker. And, I mean, they were flying all over the place. And that made it so that I could have my studio here and I didn't have to move to New York, where Chris did to establish himself as the penciler. It was harder to be a penciler. You really kind of needed to be there initially,
Hmm.
I think, to make the contacts. Then you could move away, and a lot of guys did. But and so everybody works from everywhere now. It's like nothing new. But I was kind of back in. You think about it, it's like the remotely working remotely. I
Hmm.
was doing it in 19. What was it? 88 or no, 86 is when I 80. No, 85. That was when I first got the Alien Legion job. So yeah, my working at home started in 85. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. From the long time. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I once had a studio above Dark Horse offices where I just wanted to get away from home and rent. And Mike was able to come up with a place there. And so I had a studio above and I could just go downstairs and hang out. It was over their store and then the main offices so I could see what was going on. But that was cool too. I mean, I was in Milwaukee. He bought up most all the buildings on Main Street in Milwaukee because Milwaukee was going under, really. And I think Mike really helped. Now it's not. I mean, everything is gentrifying, but I'm sure he got good deals on those buildings, and used them for
Mhm.
warehouses and for production. And at one time, I think they had over 110 employees, which was pretty good for a small
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. Yeah. Curious these days about what has your creative attention. I think you mentioned there's jazz in the mix.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been playing guitar since high school, and it's been my second love or first. I mean, drawing started earlier, like age 4 or something, but music, came later. And I'm not great. I'm musical in that I can hear, have a good ear, and I can learn things. I took theory at Portland State, music theory, and
Mhm.
for a couple of years, and I tried to understand the workings of jazz, and then I took I played a lot of different styles of music. I played, ragtime guitar and I did flat picking for fiddle tunes like bluegrass stuff and did some Chet Atkins style stuff. And then even took classical lessons for a while and learned some Bach. And And then, when I discovered jazz, and that was actually still in high school, uh, it was sort of like the final frontier. And I fell in love with, so many different artists. I think Wes Montgomery was the first jazz guitarist that I really thought was amazing. And of course, there's a ton of other ones. Pat Metheny now, I mean, even though he's at the end of his career, pretty much. I mean, I'm going to see him on Tuesday night. He'll be at the Revolution Hall here in Portland. So, and he's, 23 Grammy Awards and has pioneered so much in the field of jazz. And you can't, I don't know, his stuff it doesn't really have, it has its own genre, it's sort of like
Mhm.
not just, it's this music. So, but yeah, I love playing and I've been playing and I even taught for a little bit. And I'd like to do more, writing. I think I did about 8 arrangements of standards for solo guitar. And I bought a really nice guitar. That's a handmade guitar by a company here in Bend, a Breedlove, and it's a cutaway electric. So I was working on my classical guitar, but I wanted a nylon sound, but an
Mhm.
electric sound. So I have the full, length neck and the cutaway and the nylon string, so I get all of it, and it works for solo. It's really kind of nice.
Yeah.
Otherwise
Yeah.
I've got a Gibson ES335 that it's good for jazz, the electric sound and stuff. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's fun, and it's I see that as just something I need to keep working on and develop. And my
Mhm.
thing will be to sit in. There's at least 3 different jam sessions in Portland during the week, usually that you can let them know and you can sit in, and that's about the extent of what I can. Unless I don't know, it'd be great to have it be in a band, but I don't know where it's hard to get people together. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Um, well, and I'm just hearing as you're talking about this, the way composing is part of what you do across media, and also the teaching across media, teaching comics, teaching music. So that's definitely it seems to be part of your suit of skills, if that's a way to say that.
Yeah, I think it's part of your appreciation for the art forms. I mean,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
couldn't live without music, so it's good to know it well enough to teach something. And I'm not a great teacher, but I did spend time with another guitarist researching a systematic approach to chord inversions that we thought would be helpful because there's a million, method books out there and a million ways to think about it. And the guitar really is a difficult instrument. It's not like playing, a linear instrument. I mean, like the piano is probably the nicest layout for doing that, and you can do the most. And granted, fingerings are difficult with horns and stuff, but they're just worried about single lines and not chords.
Hmm.
So you've got both to deal with on the guitar. And anyway, it's a great challenge. I mean, it's a really cool thing to do. And same with comic books. I mean, I think storytelling is a great thing.
Hmm.
The whole concept of sequential art is, and that's why a lot of my friends they're still doing it. I mean, some of them do it because they need to make a living doing it, and others do it because they just love to do it, and they're still doing it. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's something
Yeah.
I don't need to do it at this point. I think, I'm happy doing outdoor things and working on music and then doing a lot of Comic Cons, and I do commissions and sketches, and I've still got my hand in doing lots of art. I mean, I just got back from Phoenix where we did a signing at a bookstore, and then we went hiking for 4 days in Sedona, and it was
Nice.
wonderful up in the Red Rocks, and so it's good to mix that stuff, mix and match it. And then we've got a show next week in Tacoma. It's called the Grit City Comic Con and Comic Show, and that's been there. I don't know. I've done that for at least 11 years, so it's close. You can just drive up and do it and come home. So that'll be
Yeah.
fun.
You anticipated my final question, which was going to be appearances and spaces where people can connect. So, anything
Yeah,
else that you'd like to mention there before we close
yeah.
out?
For in Portland, the next big show would be like the Fan Expo for
Mhm.
Portland.
Mhm.
And they a couple of years ago they offered to fly me around to a bunch of shows when they were doing that. Like I went to Denver and I was going to do San Francisco, and that didn't work out. But I did several places with them. But they come to Portland now. They bought up the Wizard World shows, and so they have a better system. And I'll do the Portland show for sure because it fills a nice niche in January, and it's a
Yeah.
3 day show right here. And we used to do when we had all the camps and the classes. I used to send out an email to all, if I was doing 5 schools, I'd send it to all the students that I'd been doing for the whole year. And any of the ones from the camps from the last years, I would send it out and go, I'm going to be at the Portland show, either like Rose City Comic Con's another big one in September, and that's homegrown. Fan Expo comes from out of town, but both of, either one, whatever it would be. And any student that came got a free print. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime they came, any show that they came to, and I still have students like the last show I think at Rose City was, I think we had close to 30 students come, and they're all, they're in college, they're out of college, they're still in school, middle school or something like that. So it's still a wide range of ages to cover that 13 years of teaching that we did. So it's kind of,
Awesome.
it's fun. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
My wife likes it. I should mention that she does the shows, the local ones in the Northwest that we can drive to. She does those shows with me. And if I go to Heroes Con, and then I'll go by myself, or go to, Terrific Con or any of those East Coast things, So
Mm-hmm.
that'll be me. But otherwise, she's with me and working the tables, and that always makes it fun. It's like, and she was part of those camps, so it's great to have kids come and remember. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned Heroes Con, so I hope to catch you there at
oh,
some
okay. Are
point.
you in
Yeah.
South Carolina
North
or
Carolina.
North?
Hmm.
That's what I meant. North.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charlotte. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a very good show. It was the first time I'd been there all these years and never been there, so it's kind of weird. But that was really a good show, and I've done Terrific Con now about 3 years in a row. So in Connecticut, so that's also very well attended, very good show. So those are
Yeah.
fun. When people are, the shows that are into comics are the ones that I like.
Hmm.
The ones that are into movie stars and celebrities, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
but you
Same.
still do those. You still do those shows too. So it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and glad to connect anytime. Glad to talk about your work and thank you so much for
Yeah,
stopping in. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time.